Before she left, she pressed something cold and small into my palm. She said my son asked her to find me. He died 3 days ago. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in my doorway in my slippers, holding a key I didn't recognize, looking at a young woman I had never seen before in my life. And all I could think was, he's been alive this whole time. 17 years. He was alive for 17 years and he never once called. My name is June. No, wait. I need to back up. I need to start where it actually started, not where the pain started, because those are two different places. I met my husband Walter at a church dance in Knoxville in 1978. He was 24, I was 22, and he asked me to dance twice before he worked up the nerve to ask for my number. We married the following spring. We weren't rich people. Walter worked for the county road department. I did bookkeeping part-time for a hardware store on Maple Street and raised our 2 kids, our daughter Patrice, and 4 years later our son Ethan. Ethan was the kind of boy who made you feel like everything was going to be okay. That's the only way I know how to say it. He was funny without trying to be. He could fix anything. A leaky faucet, a broken screen door, your bad mood. When he was 15, he taught himself guitar from a library book and played hymns for Walter's mother when she was dying. He didn't do it to show off. He just thought it might help. By the time Ethan was 23, Walter and I had saved a little over $42,000. It had taken us almost 30 years. We kept most of it in a joint savings account at First Tennessee Bank, and a small amount, about $9,000, in a fireproof lockbox in the bedroom closet. That was our emergency fund, Walter called it, for the thing we couldn't see coming. We were planning to use part of it to help Patrice with a down payment on a house. She'd just gotten engaged. We were happy. That whole summer felt like a good season finally arriving, after a long stretch of cold. Then one morning in September, Walter went to move some things in the closet and the lockbox was open. Empty. He came to the kitchen doorway and just stood there. He didn't have to say anything. I already knew from his face. We checked the bank account online. Walter had to sit down on the kitchen floor. The savings account had been drained 2 days earlier. A wire transfer. The name on the authorization was Ethan James Holcomb, our son. We tried calling him. His phone was disconnected. We drove to his apartment on the other side of town. He'd been renting a 1-bedroom near the university where he worked part-time in the maintenance department. His landlord met us at the door. Said Ethan had moved out 4 days ago. Paid his last month and left. Didn't say where he was going. I remember sitting in the car in that parking lot and not being able to feel my hands. Walter kept saying, "Why? Why would he do this?" He said it like a question, but he wasn't really asking. He was just trying to find a place to put it. We filed a report with the police. They were kind about it, told us wire fraud was a federal matter, gave us a number to call. Nothing ever came of it. Ethan had done it legally, technically. His name was on a secondary authorization we'd added years ago so he could help us if something happened. We hadn't bought to remove it. Walter had a heart attack 11 days later. He survived the first one. He was in the hospital for 6 days and came home with new medications and a list of things he couldn't eat anymore, and a look in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Defeat, maybe, or something close to it. He'd always been a proud man, not arrogant, just dignified. A man who paid his debts and kept his word. What Ethan did broke something in him that the doctors couldn't see on any scan. He had a second heart attack 4 months later. That one he didn't survive. I was 61 years old, widowed and $42,000 poorer, and my son had vanished so completely it was like he'd stepped off the edge of the earth. Patrice was my saving grace. She postponed the wedding, moved back in with me for a year, helped me handle Walter's affairs. She was furious at Ethan in a way I could never fully let myself be. She said what I couldn't say out loud, cried the angry tears I didn't have room for. I was too busy surviving. I sold the house. It was too big for one person and the memories were too loud. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Oak Ridge, 30 minutes from Knoxville, where rent was manageable and I knew a few people. I went back to work full-time bookkeeping for a dental practice, then later for a small trucking company. I was 61 doing the work of a 40-year-old and I did it because I had no other choice. People asked about Ethan sometimes, old neighbors, people from church. I learned to say, "We've lost touch," in a tone that ended the conversation. I didn't say, "My son stole everything and disappeared, and I think about it every single morning before I even get out of bed." I didn't say, I look at young men his age on the street and feel something I can't name. Not quite grief. Not quite rage. Something in between that doesn't have a word. I stopped expecting to hear from him after the first 2 years. After 5 years, I stopped dreaming about him. After 10 years, I thought I had made my peace with it. I was wrong about that. I was 68 when the girl knocked on my door. It was a Thursday afternoon in March. I remember because I had just gotten home from Patrice's house. She and her husband had me over for dinner most Thursdays, a tradition we'd kept for years. I was still in my coat when the knock came. I looked through the peephole. A young woman. Maybe early 20s, dark hair tied around the eyes. She had a backpack over one shoulder and she was holding something in her hand. I opened the door with the chain on. Old habit from living alone. She said, "Are you June Holcomb?" I said, "Are you June Holcomb?" I said, "Who's asking?" She said, "My name is Autumn. I'm Ethan's daughter. He passed away 6 days ago." She paused. "He asked me to find you before he died. He said to give you this." She held up a small brass key on a plain metal ring. I unlatched the chain. I don't remember deciding to do that. My hand just did it. She came inside and sat at my kitchen table, and I made coffee because I needed something to do with my hands. She was 22 years old. She looked like Ethan around the jaw and the eyes. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough that it hurt to look at her directly. She told me what she knew. Ethan had been living in Asheville, North Carolina for the past 12 years. Before that, Atlanta, then Charlotte. He'd worked construction, mostly. He met her mother, a woman named Renee. They were never married. When Autumn was 2 years old. Renee died of cancer when Autumn was 14. After that, it had been just the two of them. He was diagnosed with liver disease 8 months ago. He declined fast. At the end, he was in hospice care at a facility in Asheville. Autumn had been with him every day. She said, "He talked about you a lot near the end. He made me promise to find you. He said there was a storage unit in Knoxville. He'd been paying for it for years, and that you needed to see what was inside." She reached into the front pocket of her backpack and set a folded piece of paper on the table beside the key. "He wrote you a letter," she said. "He asked me not to read it." I looked at the letter. I looked at the key. I looked at my coffee cup. I said, "Where are you staying tonight?" She said she'd found a cheap motel on the highway. I told her she'd stay in my spare room. I told her that before I even knew I was going to say it. I didn't open the letter that night. I put it on my nightstand and lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about Walter. I thought about what he would say if he were here. Walter was a forgiving man by nature. More than me. Always more than me. But even he had his limits. I didn't know where his limit was with this. I'd never had to find out. The next morning, Autumn and I drove to the storage facility. It was on the east side of Knoxville, one of those places with rows of orange roll-up doors, Unit 114. The key fit. I pulled up the door. It wasn't a large unit. Maybe 10 by 10, but it was full. Against the back wall was a metal shelving unit with plastic bins stacked on it, all labeled in Ethan's handwriting. I recognized his handwriting immediately and had to stop for a moment. You forget, after long enough, that you still know things like that some part of you has held on to it without being asked. The bins were labeled by year, going back 17 years. Inside them, receipts. Hundreds of receipts. Wire transfer confirmations, money order stubs, cashier's check copies, all sent to the same place, a trust account at a bank in Knoxville, held in Walter's name and mine. I didn't understand at first. I pulled out one of the transfer stubs and looked at the account number. It took me a full minute to recognize it. It was our old savings account, the same account Ethan had drained 17 years ago. He'd been putting money back. Not all at once. Never large amounts. $50 one month, $200 the next. Sometimes nothing for 3 months, and then $150. Construction work is unsteady. But he had never stopped. 17 years of whatever he could scrape together, sent back to an account that Walter and I had closed after the theft because we couldn't stand to look at it. The total, across all the records in those bins, just over $38,000. He had gotten back within $4,000 of what he took. There was also a shoebox. Inside, photographs. Ethan at various ages during the years he was gone. Working a job site somewhere, with mountains in the background. Standing with Autumn when she was small, the two of them at what looked like a county fair. A photo of our house in Knoxville. The old one, the one I'd sold, the taken from across the street. He must have driven back at some point. Stood on that sidewalk and looked at it. I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and I did not try to stop what came. Autumn sat down next to me. She didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, which was exactly right. I read Ethan's letter that evening, alone in my bedroom. It was 4 pages, handwritten on yellow legal pad paper. His handwriting was the same as I remembered, slightly too large, leaning right, the way it had been since middle school. I'm not going to repeat everything he wrote. Some of it belongs to me. But there are things you need to understand. When Ethan was 22, the year before he took the money, he got involved with a man he knew from work. I'll call him what Ethan called him in the letter, a bad man. This person had drawn Ethan into something Ethan didn't fully understand at first. By the time he understood, he was in too deep. The man had documentation, real and fabricated both, that could have put Ethan in federal prison. He used it to demand money, $40,000. Ethan was terrified. He was 23 years old and he was terrified, and he made the worst decision of his life. He convinced himself he would pay it back. He told himself it was temporary. He took our money, paid what was demanded, and ran because he believed, genuinely believed, that if he stayed anywhere near Knoxville, the danger would follow him back to us. He wrote, "I knew what I was doing to you. I knew it every single day. I told myself that you would be okay, that you were strong, that I would make it right before you ever had to know. I was wrong about how long it would take. I was wrong about a lot of things." He didn't know about Walter until Autumn was old enough to help him search online. He found Walter's obituary when Autumn was 6. He wrote, "I have never in my life felt anything like what I felt reading that. I still can't write about it without my hand shaking. He said he almost called me a dozen times. He said he almost called me a dozen times. He said he picked up the phone and put it back down. He convinced himself I was better off without him, that calling would only open wounds, that I had moved on. He convinced himself of that for 17 years because the alternative, that I was waiting, that I needed to hear from him, that his silence was its own kind of cruelty, was too much to carry on top of everything else. He was wrong. He knew he was wrong. He said so. He wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I just needed you to know that I never stopped trying to fix it. I never stopped thinking about you and Dad. Not one single day." He signed it, "Your son, Ethan." I stayed in my room for a long time after I finished reading. Then I went out to the living room where Autumn was watching television with the volume low. She looked up when I came in. She had her father's eyes. I hadn't let myself see that fully until right now. I sat down in the armchair across from her. I said, "Tell me something about him. Something good." She thought for a moment. Then she said, "He made the best chili in Buncombe County and he would argue about it with anyone." She smiled a little. "He coached my soccer team when I was 9, even though he didn't know anything about soccer. He read the rule book cover to cover 3 times. We still finished last, but he made it fun." I laughed. It surprised me. The laugh just came out. It had been a long time since I laughed without meaning to. She said, "He talked about you like you were the strongest person he knew. He said you used to do the Sunday crossword in pen." I said, "I still do." She said, "I know. He said you always did." I want to be honest about something because I think people expect a certain kind of ending to a story like this. I did not forgive Ethan sitting in that living room. I didn't forgive him reading the letter. Forgiveness isn't a door that swings open the moment you understand the reasons. Or at least it isn't for me. Grief doesn't work that way. 17 years of carrying something doesn't dissolve in one evening. What I felt was more complicated than forgiveness, and maybe more true. I felt the shape of him more clearly. The frightened 23-year-old who made an impossible choice badly. The man who spent the rest of his life trying to correct it in the only way he knew how, in silence, sending $50 at a time into an account he didn't know had been closed. He never knew the account was closed. That money went somewhere. I've since spoken with the bank, and there are avenues to recover it. But Ethan never knew. He thought it was reaching us. He thought we were receiving it and choosing not to respond. And he sent it anyway, every month, whatever he could, because it was the right thing to do, even if we were never going to speak to him again. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the theft. The sending it back. Autumn stayed with me for 4 days. On the third day, we drove out to the cemetery where Walter is buried. I hadn't been in a few months. The winter had been hard, and I don't like driving on icy roads. It was a mild day, though, one of those early March days in Tennessee that feels like an apology from the weather. I stood at Walter's grave for a while without talking. Then I said out loud, he was trying to protect us. He was stupid about it, and it cost us everything. But he was trying. I don't know if that was for Walter or for myself. Maybe both. Autumn stood a little ways back to give me space. When I turned around, she was looking at the ground, giving me privacy, and in that moment she looked so much like her father had at that age that I had to look away for a second. I said, "Come here." She came and stood next to me. We stood there together for a while. This girl I'd known for 3 days. This stranger who had my son's jaw and my son's eyes and absolutely nothing to do with what he'd done, but had driven from Asheville to find me because he asked her to. On the fourth day, she had to leave. She had a job in Asheville. She works at a physical therapy clinic, scheduling and billing, and she'd already taken the week off. I walked her to her car. She had her backpack again, same as when she'd arrived. She said, "I'm glad I found you." I said, "I'm glad I found you." I said, "I'm glad you knocked." I hugged her for a long time. She let me. There's a storage unit full of plastic bins still sitting in East Knoxville. I'd been back twice. I'm still going through things. There are more photographs than I expected. There are letters he started writing over the years and never sent. I've found 6 so far, in different bins, all addressed to me or to Walter. All stopped mid-page like he ran out of nerve. I read them slowly. I give myself a few days between each one. The bank situation is more complicated than I hoped, but my nephew, Patrice's husband's brother, who works in finance, is helping me understand what options exist. It may take time. Some of it may not be recoverable. I've made my peace with that. The money was always the smaller part of what was lost. Patrice didn't say much when I told her. She sat very still for a long time. Then she said, "I'm glad he suffered." Then she cried. Then she said, "I don't mean that." I told her I thought she probably meant a little bit of it, and that was okay. We're allowed to mean a little bit of things like that. We're human beings, not saints. Autumn and I text now, not constantly. Maybe once or twice a week. She sent me a photo last week of a patch of wildflowers near a trail she hiked. No message, just the photo. I sent back a heart. That felt like enough. I turned 70 in June. Patrice is planning something. She's been suspiciously vague about it for weeks, which means it's either a party or a trip, and I'm not sure which I prefer. What I know is that I'm still here, which is more than I'd have predicted some years. Still doing the crossword in pen. Still bookkeeping part-time, 2 clients. Just enough to keep my mind in shape. Still making my mother's pound cake every Christmas and pretending the recipe doesn't need updating. I kept the key. It's in a small dish on my kitchen windowsill next to a smooth stone I picked up years ago on a trip to the Smoky Mountains. Objects I keep because they remind me of things I don't want to forget. I don't know yet how to name what I'm moving toward. Not forgiveness? Not exactly. Not closure. I've never believed in that word. Things don't close, they just change shape. What I'm moving toward feels more like understanding. And maybe, underneath it, still love. The stubborn, inconvenient, impossible to fully extinguish kind. The kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. The kind that keeps sending $50 into an account it doesn't know is closed because it's the only thing left it knows how to do. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened here. Not the surface of it, the theft, the years of silence, the letter, but the underneath. The mechanics of how one decision in one frightened moment can send 3 or 4 lives in directions they were never supposed to go. Ethan was 23 years old when he made his choice. I've turned that over so many times. 23. I remember who I was at 23, and I wasn't particularly wise either. The difference is that my worst mistakes at that age were recoverable. His wasn't. Not cleanly, not quickly, not without cost to people he loved. That's the hard truth about certain decisions. The damage doesn't stay contained to the person who made them. It spreads. Walter carried it into his chest and didn't come back from it. I carried it for 17 years in the form of a silence I didn't know how to fill. Patrice carried it as anger she's still finding the edges of. Autumn grew up with a father she could see was haunted by something he wouldn't fully explain until the very end. That's what I mean when I say cause and consequence are long. They don't settle in a week or a year. They move through time and through people. And you don't always get to see the full shape of them while you're living inside them. What I've also had to reckon with is my own part. Not in what Ethan did, I don't own that, but in the years that followed. I closed the account he was sending money to and never told anyone. Not because I was trying to stop him. I didn't know he was doing it, but because I needed to stop seeing the number. I needed that particular door shut. What I didn't know was that on the other side of that door, a young man was doing the only thing he could think to do, and he was doing it for 17 years without a single acknowledgement, believing it was reaching me, believing I was receiving it, and choosing silence as my answer. I have to sit with that. I don't get to set it down just because I didn't intend it. That's the part nobody tells you about carrying a grudge. And I was carrying one, even if I'd convinced myself I'd made peace. A grudge is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like closing an account. Sometimes it looks like moving to another city and building a quiet life and telling yourself, you're fine, when really you've just gotten good at not looking in a certain direction. What Autumn gave me, more than the key, more than the letter, more than the $38,000 worth of transfer stubs, was a reason to look in that direction again. And what I found there wasn't just Ethan's guilt and Ethan's effort. I found my own grief, intact, exactly where I'd left it. The intelligence of that, if there is any, is this. You can survive almost anything if you're stubborn enough. But survival and actually living through something are not the same. I survived 17 years. I'm only now, at 68 going on 70, starting to actually live through. Ethan spent his whole adult life trying to correct one terrible mistake. He did it imperfectly in secret, without any assurance it was working. There's something in that worth holding on to. Not as an excuse for what he did, but as evidence of what a person can choose to do after the worst version of themselves shows up. He couldn't undo the harm. He tried anyway. Every month, whatever he had, I think about that on the hard days. I think about Autumn texting me a photo of wildflowers with no caption. I think about Walter, who would have found a way to forgive long before I did, and I think, I'm working on it. I'm not done working on it. I'm not done working on it. But I'm working on it. That feels like enough for now.